published writings of Paramhansa Yogananda. Many of us, about 100 or so, are studying a republished work by Paramhansa Yogananda, one of his very first publications in his life, and it is the Scientific Healing Affirmations. Very popular book. It's almost a pamphlet, a small book, but Ananda's publishers, Crystal Clarity Publishers, have republished the book and have added various prayers and affirmations from the unpublished writings on which this program is based in their latest book, Scientific Healing Affirmations by Paramhansa Yogananda. So it triggered in me, partly because some of my friends are in the program that were studying this book, might appreciate it, but others too. I found this article published in May of 1926. It's called Christian Science and Hindu Philosophy, Part 1. Now, I was saying to friends last night as we were reviewing this newly republished book that in the 1920s, and he published the first edition was 1924, during this time, the New Thought movement, consisting of organizations like Unity Church, Church of Religious Science, and other teachings like that, were really in hot pursuit of their popularity, and I don't know when they reached their maximum or not, whether it was the 20s or the 30s, but understand that Yogananda came to America in 1920 and entered into the roaring 20s when a lot of changes were taking place and openness to new thought and new ideas. And so his timing was impeccable. But the milieu in which he appeared, in which he published this book and gave just many lectures on the power of what was called mind over matter, spiritual healing would be another term, was quite in vogue at that time. Not that it isn't now, but it was all the rage in his era. And of course, with the teachings of Vedanta, that the only substantial reality to all things is consciousness, which is to say God, it really was the dovetail fit, or the shoe fit, however you want to do it. So he talks about in this article how Mrs. Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of Christian Science, had studied the Bhagavad Gita and I suppose other Hindu scriptures, and in the, he quotes the pages in Mrs. Eddy's 7th chapter on imposition and demonstration, a chapter which was later removed from her book. Not sure I have all of this right, but anyway, in the early editions of her book, she gave voice to and recognition and credence to the fact that she had studied the Bhagavad Gita. And Yogananda quotes her, excerpt from Sir Edwin Arnold's translation of the Bhagavad Gita. Never the spirit was born, the spirit shall cease to be never. Never was a time it was not, and so on. Death hath not touched it at all, dead though the house of it seems, meaning the physical body. And in on page 259 of the 33rd edition of her book, which he doesn't seem to name here, but and I forget the name of her most famous original book, but anyway, she quotes, she writes, the ancient Hindu philosophers understood something of this principle. I suppose it must mean the principle of spiritual healing, when they said in their celestial song, according to an old prose translation, the wise never grieve for the dead nor for the living. I myself never was not, nor thou, nor all the princes of the earth, and so on. That's a quote from Sri Krishna speaking to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. And so both of those quotes he writes was found in the 7th chapter, as I mentioned earlier. And so then he goes on to talk about how all the faith traditions are really based on the same truths, same basic principles. The foundation, the power of spiritual healing is based on the truth of God's love and man's immortal nature. Hence, it is not strange to know that the Vedanta philosophy of Hinduism bears out the conclusions of Christian Science. The truth is one, men call it by various names. So you can see that this was a very meaningful entry point for Yogananda in sharing what he brought from India to share. Let's see. He says the similarity of these great teachings bring fresh hope to mankind by suggesting to it that religious principles have an inner scientific unity and can, like the discoveries of physical science, be universally used with benefit to mankind. The material scientist uses the forces of the body and nature, and the spiritual science uses mind power to enlighten the soul of man, which, in comparison, can be of even greater service to humanity. In this article, my purpose is to show not only that the doctrine of mind over matter had been worked out by the Hindus long before Christian Science, and that the similarities between the two are obvious, but that both can gain mutual benefit from their sharing. Now, Hindu scriptures point out that let me put it this way. Yogananda was warning audiences to not rely exclusively on mind over matter, exclusively on spiritual healing. I don't know much about the history of Christian Science, so I don't want to say too much, but I think the public generally views, and therefore myself, that they don't resort to medicines and so forth, and maybe even surgeries, I don't know. But that's kind of the popular belief, and it was as true in Yogananda's time as our own. So he says Hindu scriptures point out that the belief in the non-existence of matter and the disuse of medicine, in order to be practical, must not be abrupt, dogmatic, illogical, unintelligible, or inexplicable, but must be scientifically founded, proved, and understood. Okay, so when a man thinks he cannot exist a day without munching a big piece of beef steak, and at the same time talks about the non-existence of matter and the uselessness of medicine, he contradicts himself. And then this next statement is very interesting. You see this in the deeper teachings of India. If one believes in food, one believes in medicine, because food is nothing but certain chemicals taken to heal the decaying tissues, which purpose medicine also serves. So he makes a correlation then between our need for, our desire for food and its relationship to medicine. I mean, there are all sorts of books out there, aren't there, that show that and instruct us how food can be used as medicine. Okay, so the Hindu healer says that when your consciousness is on the material plane, meaning that you believe in food, need food, you have to obey material laws, no matter how much you mentally deny them. First, one ought to practice fasting under expert advice, not to reduce weight or for any other material benefit, but for the sole object of getting the soul accustomed to living without being conditioned by food. Now, in his writings, he would always talk about fasting under expert guidance, but the truth is, both then and now, what's expert guidance? Who would you go to about fasting? I mean, doctors don't know anything about fasting. So I think that was one of those caveats that one puts in writing when one puts things in writing. Fasting ought to be done with common sense, but so few people who resort to fasting seem to have much common sense. That's a joke. And yet in Yogananda's own recipes, he has one whole lesson in his original lessons talks about the different fasts and diets, and they're very practical. I don't have time, and this program isn't designed to get into that, but he recommends, I'll just say simply, 1 day a week fasting on like orange juice and ground nuts to stabilize the protein level in the bloodstream. Once a month, doing a 3-day juice fast, and then periodically doing what he calls a 9-day cleanse. But again, one has to really tune into your own body, and not that many people can actually fast successfully. But a day-long juice fast, whatever it may do for the body, is good for the soul. And that's really what his point is. Now I want to tell a story. Shankara, one of the greatest Hindu savants who lived in the 6th century A.D., in my prior broadcasts I've quoted as late as the 9th century, they always argue about this stuff, was the foremost exponent of the Vedanta philosophy in India. And he taught the illusion of matter and the eternal reality of man's true nature. A story is told about a conversation between Shankara and a certain black magician, not referring to his skin color now, just, whatever black magic is. The latter used to acquire magical powers through human sacrifice. I don't have a clue what the relationship is between magic powers and human sacrifice, but I do know that at the time of birth and death there is a great power that can be felt as the soul transits from one form into or out of another. While Shankara was preaching the non-existence of matter, the black magician approached him and said, "If matter is an illusion, then what is this I see before me?" pointing to Shankara's body. "That is an illusion," Shankara replied. The magician was quick to seize this opportunity and said, "Well, if your body is non-existent to you, let me use this illusion to some practical purpose and acquire some more powers for myself." "Take it," the great Shankara replied, and was ready to ignore his body as if it were an image in a forgotten dream. Thus Shankara, the Swami of Swamis, founder of the Swami order and full of practical realization of his own imperishable nature, agreed to accompany the black magician, who led him to a forest, bathed him like a goat for sacrifice, began to sharpen his long knife for the slaughter in accordance with the rites of black magic. Even then, Shankara did not lose his knowledge, that his realization that the body was an illusion. He was not a fanatic, and he knew exactly what he was doing. Just then, at that moment, one of Shankara's most advanced disciples, sitting in deep meditation, on opening his spiritual eye, saw to great horror the vision of his master about to be sacrificed at the hands of this wicked magician. Through his great devotion and psychic power, the disciple quickly dematerialized his own body, reappeared at once in the forest, and there he saw the knife about to fall on his master's neck, and he looked at the magician with his eyes burning with spiritual electricity. The necromancer's whole body was electrocuted, and he gave up the ghost with a loud voice. Shankara asked, "Why did you kill that man?" "Sir, he was going to kill you." To which the teacher replied, "Foolish one, didn't I teach you all is an illusion? How could he kill me who have no body?" The disciple smilingly replied, "Dear master, if the attempt to kill you was an illusion, then the act of divine law killing the magician through me was an illusion too." So, I don't know what you can really do with all that, but I think what I'm saying is stressing the importance of being practical as we move in our journey away from matter consciousness to soul consciousness. And in that, I'm going to end by reading this thought affirmation. Somebody read it last night at our class, and it was always one of my favorites from Yogananda's original edition. He says here, "Concentrate thought in the forehead and repeat the following. I think my life to flow, I know my life to flow, from brain to all my body to flow. Streaks of light do shoot through my tissue root. The flood of life through vertebrae doth rush through spine in froth and spray. The little cells are all drinking, their tiny mouths are all shining. The little cells are all drinking. Their tiny mouths are all shining. Okay, great souls. Isn't that fun? All right. I encourage you to get this Crystal Clarity Public